Good to see all of you this morning. I apologize to Isaac. I forgot about turning that light on this morning when I come in the building. But it's interesting for me this morning. My mind keeps going back to Earl Rockwell today. Bill can remember back in the day, you'd walk in if services started at 9, Bible study, 9:30 or whatever, 10:15. At 10:14, he might walk up to you and say, "You're leading singing." And it wasn't a question if you would. It was get up there and lead singing. And I pulled that on Sam a little bit ago and walked up here and said, "I forgot about Aaron messaged me this morning. He's preaching out in Middleburn today and was not going to be here to read the scripture." And I'd forgotten to mention that to Randy, and I turned and said, "Sam, you're reading Philippians 1." And I didn't give him any choice. I said, "You're going to read it." So anyway, I appreciate him jumping in. And Isaac, I knew he was going to be here today, and so I let him cover the song leading for us this morning. So anyway, great to see all of you. I want to talk a little bit about this text, and not got a broader picture here from our scripture reading, but I'm going to hone in really verses 9 and 10 for the most part in our study this morning of this moment where Paul has this conversation with those in Philippi, and he tries to get them to appreciate some very, very fundamental requests, if you will. And in fact, this is really part of a prayer. He says, "These are the things that I'm petitioning the Father on your behalf about." And these are the kinds of things that when I'm in my personal prayers, Paul says, and I'm beseeching the Father for certain things as it relates to the various disciples, when it comes to you there in Philippi, these are the things, these are the requests that I'm presenting before the Father's ears that I'm hoping will improve and grow in your relationship with the Father. And so I want to really begin to hone in here in verse 9. And there's three things that I want to talk to you about today. The first and the last are going to be real quick. The middle section is really where I'm going to focus in our discussion this morning. But the first thing he mentions there in verse 9 is that he desires a request that love may abound. He recognized that there were challenges they were facing. Jump over a couple of chapters into chapter 4 and in verse 2. Same letter, Philippians chapter 4 and verse 2. But notice that he had to implore a couple guys to behave better. He said in verse 2, well, begin in verse 1 if you will, chapter 4, "Therefore, my beloved and longed for brethren, my joy and crown, so stand fast in the Lord, beloved." It's a beautiful way, by the way, he describes his relationship with them. He speaks of them as his beloved. He speaks of them as these folks that are a joy and a crown to him. But in the very next breath, notice verse 2, he says, "But I implore Euodia and I implore Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord." There appears to be at least two individuals there in that congregation of people. We talked briefly this morning about the fact that when Paul wrote Timothy, he was willing to name Hymenaeus and Alexander, right, that had made shipwreck of the faith. Well, he doesn't hold back here when he writes to these folks in Philippi, and he says, listen, there are two guys there that need to start behaving better. And they're sowing discord, and there's disgruntlement between them. There's this challenge between these two men, and they need to fix this. I implore them to get back to being of the same mind. And I simply illustrate that to you because when you go back to chapter 1 and you think about this commission, this request, this prayer that Paul was making, that love would abound, they needed it. Because they had individuals there that needed to overcome some discord, and the fact of the matter is, love's really the only answer to that. You know what we try to answer discord with sometimes? More discord. We try to fix discord, strife, challenge, complaint, difficulties. We try to fix it with more of it and exacerbating it and continuing it and multiplying it when the real answer has always been love. The answer to conflict is love. The answer to strife is love. The answer to difficulties is love. And I realize that's a very simplistic thing for me to say this morning, but it's important for us to appreciate. These two men, Paul was imploring them to start thinking like the Lord again. And the Lord has love in his heart, his mind, and his actions always. Paul's prayer and request before the Lord for those in Philippi was that they would let love abound, not continue to sow discord. And he says, I'll pray that they do that without hypocrisy, right? that there's no hypocritical approach towards that. Mark your Bibles in Philippians. I'll be back there in a minute, but I want you to notice something Paul wrote to those in Rome in Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12 and in verse 9. Similar thought processes here. Let love be without hypocrisy. And I don't know how else to ask this question, by the way, to get you to think about it, but have you ever faked love? Right? Have we ever pretended, right? Have we ever pretended and behaved in one way when our heart was completely different than what our actions were? And what I want us to appreciate this morning, friends, is that Paul prayed that love would abound. Paul commissioned those in Rome to think about love as not something that was simply an action, but love was something that was promoted from within first. Let love be without hypocrisy. Now, it's a challenge. It's not always easy, and yet it's something we need to commission ourselves to. Let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil. Cling to what is good. That's how we accomplish that. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor giving preference to one another. By the way, giving preference to one another is not an easy task, because sometimes I'm very entrenched in my preferences. You all have experienced this, by the way, if you've ever gone out to eat with more than one person. And it's like a battle royale in the car, right? Trying to figure it out. Right? And nobody wants to commit. By the way, you want a quick trick to that? Here's how I get out of it all the time. I pick places I know they don't like. And then they'll have to pick. Right? We're going to Arby's, and all of a sudden the options start coming. I just ruined my chances for Arby's coupons in live stream. But anyway, you get what I'm trying to say. Love is not always easily demonstrated, but it should never be feigned or with hypocrisy or where we're showing actions of love, but in our heart we really don't even care for that. That's the kind of thing Paul was trying to get them to see needs to leave their mindsets. Build the right kind of love so that our behaviors and our hearts match, right? So that our behaviors and our heart and our thinking, that they match. They're not a battle between the two. And that love then is active. Activate it. Paul's prayer was that their love should abound, that love should just be overflowing from them there in Philippi. And that's going to require that love to be active. 1 John chapter 2, beginning in verse 5. 1 John chapter 2, verse 5. But whoever keeps his word, truly the love of God is perfected in him. By this we know that we are in him. He who says he abides in him ought himself also to walk, behave, walk, live, just as he walked. If you say you love the Lord, then walk like he walked, right? If you say you love Jesus, don't just commit to those words, commit to that life. Don't just commit to those statements, but commit to the behaviors and the choices. Make love active. Paul's prayer before God for those in Philippi was that love would abound. But here's where my mind was really going out of this text. That's the setup, if you will. But here was something that just kind of struck me, that Paul was praying for. He prayed there in Philippians chapter 1 that they would have the ability to discern excellence, or that they may approve the things, verse 10, that are excellent, and that you may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ. Will you think about this with me for a little bit this morning? Anything worth doing for the Lord is worth doing with excellence. Well, I think about what Paul, you think about all the things you might do in life, and you just want it right, right? Maybe you got family coming in over the next few days. And I mean, you're doing it, right? You're going 100 miles to make sure that it is just right. The decorations look right, and the meal is just right, and the presents are just right, and right? And we put all this energy and effort. I'm not discrediting any of that, by the way. You want to do that? By all means. My question is, how come we don't put the same energy, thought, and desire for excellence in our service to God? Doesn't He deserve the same level of energy and focus? Does He not deserve the same amount of time and effort and precision that we put into other things in our life? Or does Jesus just kind of get whatever I might have left? And I don't mean what's in your wallet. I mean what's left of your energy and your dedication and your purposes and your focus. Discern excellence. Now that's going to require some things of us. Paul wrote to those in Thessalonica. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 22, you remember that simple statement. It simply says, abstain from every form of evil. In order to discern what is excellent, I've got to get my mind and my actions away from that which God describes as evil. Too often, our minds just simply don't stay focused enough on what is right and good and holy in the eyes of God, and we find ourselves adopting evil in ways that maybe we don't even discern at times. In order to have excellence, then evil's got to go away. It's got to stay out of the framework. It's got to stay out of the picture. It's got to stay out of the conversation. And the focus then becomes on that which is good. I've mortified the deeds of the body. I've put aside the sins and behaviors of this world. I've taken evil and I've moved it off. I'm avoiding it. Because excellence requires me to focus on that which is good. You know, sometimes when you're trying to encourage and be an example and in some senses even lead others, we can sometimes become so focused, though, on acknowledging all the bad behaviors and all the misbehaviors and all the negative things that we forget to realign the eyes towards that which is good. We're just always, right? We're just always seeing the negative. I've stood in the bleachers down here many an afternoon during a rehearsal of Deborah's bands, and all I can see is the people out of step. That's all I can see. The reason that's all I can see is because that's all I was looking for. I was just looking for the mistakes. I was just looking for the things. And there's an avoiding evil. That's not evil, although in Hood's era it was, but never mind. But you understand the analogy. That's a necessary part. We've got to avoid it. We've got to note the things that are wrong and get them pushed aside. But then we got to realign the eyes. And get our eyes refocused on the good. Congregations at times will have to acknowledge and point out the sinful choices that individuals are making, and we might have to encourage them in the right paths and do the. But then realign the eyes. Acts 16, if you're not there yet. Acts 16, verse 14. Now a certain woman named Lydia heard us, and she was a seller of purple from the city of Thyatira who worshiped God. And the Lord opened her heart to heed the things spoken by Paul. And when she and her household were baptized, she begged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. And so she persuaded us. Her desire was to know more and more and more of that which was excellent in the eyes of God. I want to know if I'm stepped outside of what God permits. I want to know if I've transgressed and sinned against His will, because I know that those things need to be corrected. But to discern and to pursue that which is excellent, I've also got to spend time and energy knowing what is good. And here's an example of somebody who realized that when she heard the gospel presented by the Apostle Paul, that she was hearing that which was good and was begging him, can I hear more? Will you stay with us a little longer so that we can hear more of that which is good and that which is excellent? Friends, can I encourage us as a congregation of God's people to recognize that, yes, at times we've got to avoid the evil, address those things, because we're trying to discern what's excellent and we want to do things that are excellent in the eyes of God. But then realign the eyes and get focused on the good. A congregation who only is pointing out the wrong will never move forward. I think I could evidence that, by the way, by those churches in Revelation. Those 7 churches that Jesus specifically revealed things to John about. He talks about some that were lukewarm. They just weren't doing anything. He talks about some who hated sinful behaviors but had forgotten their first love. I'll have a little bit more next Sunday to talk about when it comes to moving into a new year. But as we're closing out, right? Begin to close out another year, and we turn a new chapter, a new year besets us if the Lord wills. Can we as a congregation start maybe thinking that way? Are we pursuing the things that are excellent? Are we striving to do that which is good? Have we become so enamored, so focused, so purposed in making sure we don't do anything wrong that we never actually do anything good either? And to ignore evil is not a good choice. But to lose sight of what is good and excellent in the purposes of God, He deserves that from us. He deserves that from me personally, and He deserves that from us as a body of believers. What will we do moving forward to see that this local body of believers works towards excellence in doing the good that God has commissioned and purposed us to? And that's evidenced by the things that I do and approve of. Notice this interesting thought here in Romans chapter 14, verse 22. And we can see this verse, I believe, both directions. Notice it with me. Verse 22 of Romans 14. Do you have faith? Have it to yourself before God. Happy is he who does not condemn himself in what he approves. For me personally and for us as a body of believers, to move towards excellence, it requires us to not solely think about what I'm doing in the moment, but to also think about what are the kinds of things that we stand behind and approve of and consent to. I think that's a challenge that God's for us. To appreciate that what I'm accepting of is just as important in discerning excellence as what I actually do and behave in. What do I mean by that? I mean, there are going to be times in my life where I might say, well, I wouldn't choose that, but you go right ahead. And if that's sin, then we're making a mistake. To discern, to seek, to push forward towards excellence is a mindset that avoids all the evil, whether it's active or approving, and wants the things that I approve of and do to be found excellent in the eyes of God. Can we challenge ourselves to not just give God what's convenient or comfortable or easy, but can we challenge ourselves to give God what is excellent? And it's defined excellence by the testimony and purposes and good that God has described. Let's go back to that letter that Paul wrote to those in Philippi, chapter 4, this time, verse 8. Chapter 4, verse 8. He said, finally, brethren, whatever things, you want to talk about a mind that's excellent? A mind that's devoted towards discerning excellence? Finally, things are true, are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there's any virtue, if there's anything praiseworthy, think on or meditate on these things. The things which you have learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. There's where our minds are. There's where we can get our minds engaged in discerning excellence. Think on these things. And then he wrapped that text up there in Philippians chapter 1 in our earlier reading by saying to do that, all of these things that we've been talking about, pursuing love, discerning excellence, actively pursuing that which is good, and do that without offense till the day of the Lord. And I think he describes how it is that we accomplish that. He said in verse 10 that we should do that with sincerity. I don't know how else to say this. It's a poor way to say it, but don't play games with God. Sometimes we can see through the sincerity or lack thereof in individuals, but sometimes not. God sees it instantaneously. It's offensive. It's offensive to God to see people who have energy and fervor and excitement about anything and everything but Him. So be sincere in this. He challenges us. Be sincere, not with offense. Be dedicated to these purposes, but do them in the right ways. And he concludes that, verse 11, being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. I'm going to fill my life with that which is righteous and good, and the fruits that God would have me to bear and grow. I wouldn't want anybody to ever quit on God. But I am trying to challenge all of us this morning that if we're not being honest and open and sincere in that relationship, quit that. Quit that feigned, insincere, dare I even say dishonest approach towards God. And let's start pursuing excellence. Let's do that with love for one another. Let's do that avoiding discord and the challenges that comes. Let's work together to declare Jesus and the hope and the promise and the salvation that He brings to all that will receive it. Let's personally and collectively dedicate ourselves to doing our absolute best for the Lord. And I don't know whether that will have any numerical effect on a congregation, because that side has always belonged to the Lord. But I do know that it will help a church grow in its active, fervent heart to honor God with excellence. And so I challenge myself and all of us to fulfill these requests and prayers that Paul had for those in Philippi in our personal walks and our congregational walk in service to God. There's a great home that God's prepared. Jesus said to His disciples when they were troubled by the fact that He told them He was going to leave and go back to His Father, and He said, there's many mansions, there's many abodes, many resting places, and I go to prepare that for you there in John chapter 14. I go to make ready a place for you. There's a place for all of us if we'll just dedicate ourselves to the purposes of God to go to His home and find that rest and abode that He's prepared, and that Jesus paid the ultimate price of His life on a cross to make possible. How can we help you pursue that today? How can we help you seek that which is good and excellent in your personal relationship with the Father? And if we can encourage you, strengthen you, help you, pray for you, whatever we might be able to do to lead you spiritually today, won't you come as we stand and as we